Welcome back to Losing to Defensives. Hello everyone, and today I'm showing you my Raizer deck profile for the V Premium format. This deck is pretty okay. It's definitely not great, but it's also not terrible. I think if you compare it to the other Nova decks, I think it's better than something like Beast Deities or Heroes, but it's not as good as something like Victor. And as for where it places it in the metagame, it's definitely like a solid like tier 2 deck. But what this deck is though is a lot of fun, and if you're looking for a nice easy entry point into the clan, then Battle Raizers are just a phenomenal deck to build. I think they're basically just like Transformer sort of like Gundam looking robots, and you know the playstyle is what Novas are all about, which is to just beat your opponent and with a bunch of Restands, and you know that's just Nova Grappler at their core, right? As for card quality, Novas have pretty good cards, so we're going to make use of those cards to make our deck a little bit better, and this deck actually pluses a decent amount, but it's still very piece reliant because you need to see specific cards. Luckily the new support that the deck got helps us to see those cards, and that's pretty much it for the little intro. So without further ado, let's read some cards, let's look at some cards, let's do a deck profile, right? So Axel 2 always, because it's just the best Axel gift. There are very little, there are very specific decks that use Axel 1, but for the most part you're going to go Axel 2. So starting off with the Grade 0, we play Battle Raizer. This is because there are two cards in our deck that interact with the Grade 0, so it's important that we play this Grade 0 specifically. And what's a better way than to start off with the Grade 3s, right? The reason why we built the deck. So what does Mega Flare do? So Mega Flare, or Ultimate Raizer Mega Flare, has two skills. The first skill is a skill, and the second skill is actually pretty good. So the first skill is that when one of your Raizers attacks, you can counterblast 2 to rest him, and then restand him and the other unit. I don't know why Bushi thought that counterblast 2 for a single restand is good, but you know, it is what it is, right? In a pinch scenario, you can kind of use it as another attack extension. However, the skill that actually is pretty good is at the end of the battle that it attacked, if you have no stood front or rear guards, you can counterblast 1, choose a grade 2 Raizer from your soul, and then you ride it as stand, and then at the end of the battle, you re-ride a grade 3 Raizer from your soul as rest. So, why the second skill is so good is because if you're just looking at like not even taking into consideration checks or drive checks or anything, you basically see 5 cards from your deck, which is actually pretty good. So you see 1 card from riding him on on your third turn, right, when you get the gift, and then you do 2 drive checks, and then you re-ride a grade 2 from your soul, so that's another drive check, and then at the end of the turn you rewrite him from the soul, and that's another draw. So 5 cards for basically 1 counterblast is pretty good. And that's pretty much it for him. He is the only card that we ever want to see as our Vanguard, and nothing else. But we play other grade 3s, like the 3 copies of Maximum Raizer. So, why are we playing Maximum Raizer? Well, it's because this is the best unit to restand over and over again. His skill is that when it attacks, while it's not boosted, he gains 10k, so putting him at 22. If you have him on an Axel circle, then the card goes to 27, which is a pretty good number, and is our biggest beater. So it's very important that you see at least 1 copy of the Maximum Raizer, just because it's the unit that are going to be restanding over and over and over again. However, the unit does not have an Axel gift, so if you see it in the early game, honestly, I probably just guard it or discard it, and then G-assist for the grade 3, for the Ultimate Flare, or the Mega Flare. So, for the grade 2s, we play 4 copies of Dual Flare, and this is the most important card in the deck. It's just the card that the whole deck revolves around. Its first effect is that if you have no stood rear guards, it gets +3 for each of your opponent's grades. So a lot of the times when you're going to be swinging with it, your opponent is probably on grade 3, and this gains an additional 9k power, putting it at 18, which is pretty good. The other effect is that when it attacks, you can put it into soul and then choose one of your Vanguards, give it 5k, and then if you have no face-up damage, you countercharge 1. The reason why this card is just the most important card in the deck is because since it gains power on the Vanguard circle, it means that when you rewrite it with Mega Flare, you can actually hit the opponent's grade 3s, and a lot of the times you can actually force them to guard a decent amount. the effect to countercharge is also very relevant because our Mega Flare requires 1 counterblast. So it means that if you see this as a rearguard, you always have the countercharge for that play. And overall, it's just a pretty solid rearguard. It puts in a lot of work. Also, the foiling is like really nice. I think hopefully Bushi keeps doing like different kinds of foiling because I was getting pretty tired of the traditional triple R foiling, and this one is pretty good. For other Raizers that we play in the deck, we play 4 copies of High Power Raizer Custom, and this card is okay. I think there are better grade 2s that you could run, but I'm running it more for the flavor and the fact that it's kind of tutorable rather than it being like a phenomenal card or something. I think the promo that gives your Vanguard 10k is like a really good option, but this card is still pretty good. So when placed, you can call a Battleizer from the Soul into the same column as this unit, so that's something that you need to keep in mind, is to, if you're going to call the High Power Raizer Custom, make sure that you don't have anything in the back row so you can call the Battleizer in the same column. And that column is 13, I believe, because the starter is 4k. No, the starter is 6k, so that puts it at 15. 15 is a pretty good number. It means that you can hit Force Vanguards pretty comfortably. The other skill is that on hit, you can counterblast 1, put the Battleizer into your soul, and restand 1 of your rearguards. Ideally, you're going to be restanding the maximum Raizer, because like I said, that's the rearguard with the most power in your deck, and also gives the unit a little bit of on-hit pressure. So, you know, if the opponent doesn't want to guard, well, that's another attack that they have to take. But if they just want to guard at 15k, you're at least asking for an intercept, which is, you know, not the worst. You're trading a card, right? And then next turn, assuming that they don't board wipe you, you can do it all over again, or intercept with it. But, you know, that's just like vanilla Vanguard, right? That's just Vanguard Concepts 101. Decent card, on hit pressure, it's tutorable. And then for the final Raizer that we play 1 copy of Burst Raizer. His effect is that when your Vanguard attacks, you can counterblast 1, Soul Blast 1, and restand it, and then if your opponent is at 4 or more damage, he gains 3k. So this effect is kind of underwhelming because, you know, 9 plus 3 puts it at 11, and that seems like a pretty terrible number, but if a lot of times you're going to put this in an Axle Circle because you generate a pretty decent amount of Axle Circles in this deck, especially on your following turn past your first grade 3 turn. So, you know, at that point then you're hitting for pretty decent numbers, assuming that your opponent is on 5 damage, you're still asking them to commit a card, right? So a restand that doesn't really cost you anything, that you don't, it's not on hit or anything, it's just when your Vanguard attacks you can restand him, is pretty fine. It's okay. But we just play 1 because it's searchable, really. And then for the generic grade 2 in the deck, we play 3 copies of Cool Hank. Cool Hank still continues to be an amazing card for Nova Grappler, and most Nova Grappler builds can kind of just put this in very comfortably. I think 3 is a fine number. He is probably the best unit that we want to ride into because he has that on-hit Soul Blast 1 draw card, which is pretty good. So, you know, you get to do a draft check, and then you also get to draw cards, so that's 2 cards on your second turn, which is very nice. And then his restand condition is just when this unit attacks, you discard a card, and then you restand 1 of your other rearguards. The reason why I like Cool Hank so much over something like Kick Typhoon is because I will happily trade a card in my hand to restand something instead of using a counterblast, because there are other units that would rather use that counterblast on, right? So that's why I'm playing something like the Cool Hank. Overall, pretty solid unit. You know, it helps us get more attacks, especially by restanding the Maximum Raizer. For grade 1s, we play 4 copies of Raizer. And before I go into his skill, support your boy, leave a like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. Let me know that you're enjoying the video, and, you know, let me know what other cards you're putting in your deck, because I'm always looking for ways to improve my decks, right? Also follow me on Twitch and Twitter, because, you know, if you want more content, that's where you'll find it. Anyway, so Raizer, his skill is that when he's placed on the Vanguard Circle, you call a Raizer from your soul. Well, you may, so you don't have to do it, but you can, and you can call it to the Rearguard Circle. And then the other skill is that you can counterblast 1, put a Rearguard into your soul, and then you search a Raizer with grade +1, right? And you call it to a Rearguard Circle. So, you can put himself into soul for his own effect, and that way you can always get to your dual flare, but you can also put your Raizer into your soul and get a grade 1, or you can put a grade 2 and then get a grade 3. So overall, this will always get you sort of that missing piece, and for Counterblast and basically gaining a soul, it's a very good effect. And this card was probably like the most welcome card. I think this was like the best card that it could have given Battle Rises to sort of like make the whole deck more consistent and make all of the new support and old support work together. This is why you can kind of get away with running like techie 1-ofs or 2-ofs, because you can always kind of see them with the Raizer. Overall, this card's just like really good. For the only other grade 1 Raizer that we play 2 copies of Raizer. So there was a lot of slots that you could run. Some lists opt to not even play additional grade 1s, just play 8 grade 1s, but that kind of like wrestles my jimmies a little bit. I think like 10 grade 1s is like the minimum that I'll ever play in any of my decks. And I was looking for different Raizers that I could play. Jet Raizer was definitely like a solid card that we could run, because Jet Raizer can gain a ton of power, but we already have units that can kind of gain power and don't really need to work as hard as Jet Raizer, because Jet Raizer is, for every unit you call, he gains power. The card is phenomenal in something like Premium, where, you know, a big booster that restands can be really helpful, but for V Premium, I think Raizer is just good enough that I would include it in the deck. Its effect is when it boosts, you can Soul Blast 2 to countercharge 1, and then if the attack targets Vanguard, this gets +3, so it becomes an 11k booster, which is pretty good. So this deck, Soul is really important, and I'll explain why Soul is so important once we get to the other grade 0s in the deck, right? If you already know what's coming, it's Cat Butler, right? This is a Cat Butler build. So the reason why I'm playing the Raizer though is because there are times where you don't see enough copies of the Cat Butler and you kind of have to go for a killing turn, and so sometimes you do have spare soul in the deck, especially because you have things like the Raizer that can put rear guards into the soul. So, you know, in pinch scenarios where you want the counter charge, you can use the Raizer to Soul Blast 2 to counter charge 1. But because he's also a pretty good booster, and, you know, he has the name, he kind of just ticks all the boxes to make him sort of like viable, right? The card is just aggressively okay, honestly. And, you know, if I don't see Cat Butlers, then I can use the Soul to counter charge. That's pretty much it. And then for the final grade 1s in the deck, we run 4 copies of Arashi. This is just a grade 3 searcher. Pretty solid card overall. You know, because you have one grade 3 that you want to see all the time, it's important that we play 4 copies of it. It also gains power for just restanding a rear guard, which is pretty good, putting it at 13k. So worst case scenario, it's a booster or a beater. And a lot of the times what I do with it is use the effect, search my grade 3 for either the maximum Raizer or just the Mega Flare, and then I can discard it to just deck thin a little bit, and then I can shove it into Soul with the Raizer and get access to a grade 2. So it's sort of like a currency, like economy card. It kind of just lets you see more cards, and, you know, just flows pretty well with the whole deck. Finally, for the funniest card in the deck is 4 copies of Cat Butler. So why do we run Cat Butler? Well, it's just because it's the best way to take advantage of the fact that we are going to be attacking with a grade 2 Vanguard, right? So if you don't know what Cat Butler does, also Cat Butler is sort of like nostalgic because it was a card that interacted with the Legions from way back, and that's what made Raizers like really good, since, you know, you technically had a grade 2 Vanguard. When you Legion, you could use Cat Butler to restand your Legion, and that was really funny, right? It's sort of what made Raizers good. And here, it's the same concept, just not as strong, right? So, at the end of the battle, that your Vanguard attack, if the attack did not hit, you can Soul Blast 1, retire this unit, and then choose your units, and it gets plus 3000k. And if that unit is a grade 2 or less Vanguard, you restand it. So, the whole goal of the deck, and this is why we deck thin so much and why we draw so much, is you need to see like as many copies of Cat Butler as possible. And then what you do is when you use the effect of the Mega Flare to rewrite into the Dual Flare, right? The Dual Flare will gain like X amount of power and it can hit your opponent, and then, you know, this will be in the soul or whatever, and then you basically swing with it, and you, the attack didn't hit, well, you use Cat Butler, Soul Blast 1, and then you restand, and you go again, and then, the attack didn't hit, you Cat Butler, restand, you know, and you should keep doing that over and over again, right? So that's why it's important to sort of like decide when you want to go for sort of like your kill turn, because once you do that, you'll exhaust all of your resources, and, you know, if the opponent lived through it, then it was just really pointless. But if you win the game, then, you know, you win the game, right? Easy dubs. And this is really what the whole deck is built around, is just seeing as many copies of Butler to restand our dual flare and try to check triggers and just really just bash our opponent in the face as much as possible. You could probably run different cards, there's definitely builds where you don't run the Butler, but I think the card is too nostalgic not to, right? It's kind of it's the whole thing, right? It's what the deck is known for. Let's just, recreate that and inhale some copium together. Finally, for triggers, I think there's a few ways to go about it. You can run 12 crit, or you can run more draws, but I think just a standard 8-4-4 is just pretty consistent. Even though the deck is pretty solid and average, I'm still trying to make the deck as best as I can, and even though we swing a lot with our Vanguard and we could potentially run fronts, because the deck kind of focuses on one restanding, one or two units that will restand a few times rather than a bunch of units, crits just end up being better, so you can't really run fronts, unfortunately. So because of that, we're running 8 crits, just pretty standard, and then 4 draws, because they're also sentinels, and compressing rolls and drawing cards is good. And then finally 4 copies of the heal guards, because we like having counter blast, but sometimes we don't want to get one shot, or we like to play the game basically. And heal guardians, the 5k shield loss in this deck doesn't really matter. You're mostly just trying to survive to get to your turn, and getting a free defensive is just perfect. So that's pretty much it for the deck profile. The deck is a lot of fun, and like I said, if you're looking for an entry point for Nova Grappler, I think this is one of the best decks to do so, just because all of the pieces are really easily accessible, and everything got reprinted, and the deck is pretty budget friendly. So again, if you guys did enjoy this video, don't forget to leave a like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.